We're going to start the short story, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Remember that we are going to be making some inferences. We want to be looking at the mood. We want to be remembering we already have a setting, and this is going to be from a time past, and it's going to be in a European country, maybe Italy, France, perhaps even Spain itself. It's going to be during a time called Carnival, which is very similar to our Mardi Gras. We know that our main character is Montresor, who is also our narrator. And then there is another character who's going to be named Fortunato. So I know that my two main characters' names are Montresor and Fortunato. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. Taking a pause, I want to remind myself of my words here, okay? And impunity means freedom from punishment, penalty, or harm. So I know that he plans to take his revenge without being caught. This seems like a common kind of thing. If you're doing something wrong, oftentimes you don't want to be caught doing it. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. That seems a little bit difficult to understand. We better take a different set here. So the wrong is not taken care of, okay, when all you can think about is getting your revenge. It's also not avenged when you do not let the person that has wronged you know that you are getting your revenge. That makes sense. So if you're taking revenge, you need to make sure you go about it in a certain manner so that the person that you are getting your revenge on knows that this is why I am doing this to you. This is my revenge because of what you did to me. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. Okay, so he's saying that he was being good-natured, and he was not letting on that he was up to no good. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected, even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Okay, we might want to look at this connoisseurship. Okay, this is the concept that it is very important to have a certain expertise or authority, especially in fine arts or matters of taste. Wine, okay, in many European cultures and even in American culture, the very expensive wines have certain things about them that make them more expensive. They specifically called their vintage, what year that they were made, how they were bottled. This is important here to them. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. Remember that virtuoso is another of our words. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. So these two have something in common in that they both know a lot about wine. It was about dusk one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party striped dress, and his head was surmounted by a conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado, a pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of Carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." Amontillado. Okay, and this is going to be a pale, dry sherry, and this is going to be something that was highly sought after. Amontillado. "I have my doubts." Amontillado. "And I must satisfy them." Amontillado. "As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchese. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, 'Lucchese cannot tell Amontillado from sherry.' And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement." "Lucchese, I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchese, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." So remember what's happening here is he's using this man's ego and saying, "Oh, you're too busy. I'm just going to go to this other guy." And so by doing this, he's tricking Fortunato into going along with him, but tricking him in the way of making him think it's his own idea. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. Oh, so everybody else is out partying, so nobody knows what's going on. I had told them that I should not return until the morning and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. So he's using this concept that we think of as reverse psychology. He says, "I'm not going to be here, but I don't want you to go anywhere. I'm not going to come back, but I don't want you to go anywhere." So as soon as he left, they were out of there. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. Okay, remember what catacombs are. You may not have heard of this before, but at the time, people who are rich would have their own place to bury their dead. And so these catacombs would often be underneath their own homes, deep underground. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe?" said he. "It is farther on," said I. "But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned toward me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. So we look here, eyes clouded and watery from drunkenness. So we need to know that this man, Okay, Fortunato has been under the influence. He's been partying all day. So he's been easily brought into this man's home under the pretense, perhaps, of going to look at this Cask of Amontillado. Niter? He asked at length. Niter, I replied. How long have you had that cough? My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. It is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with decision. We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchese. Enough, he said. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, I replied, and indeed I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle that I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink, I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us. Okay, so he takes a bottle, okay, which is going to be made of glass, and he literally just breaks the top of that bottle off, and they start drinking out of this bottle. He again took, and I to your long life, he again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, he replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A human foot d'or in a field of azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo mi impune la sezet. Okay, and if we look at this, it's going to have our translation here. It says, nobody provokes me with impunity. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. Okay, so he's starting to feel the effects of the alcohol. We had passed through walls of piled bones with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. Okay, so he keeps talking about the niter. So think about it, you're in a very deep underground cold place that's going to have mold and mildew. That's because of the amount of liquid that is on the walls. Also, you're looking at it in terms of this is where people are essentially buried. Okay, they are openly entombed. The niter, I said, see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vault. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back before it is too late. Your cough. It is nothing, he said. Let us go on. But first, another draught of the Medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Gouvet. He emptied it in a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with gesticulation. I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. So, remember that they are drinking alcohol as they go. So this is going to be setting him up to be a little bit different here. Okay? You do not comprehend, he said. Not I, replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Okay, looking down, referring to the Masons as a Freemason, a member of a social organization with secret rituals and signs. So he does something very specific with his hands and the way he acts. And he expects the other to know what it means, but Montresor doesn't know what it means. Yes, I said. Yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered. producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roque l'oreille. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. A trowel, okay, is often used when you are laying cement. It's something that smooths the cement. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. Okay, so we're looking at it as human remains, just a big, huge pile of bones. So it takes a long time for the soft tissues of the body to completely fall apart, from the outside and the muscles and the skin all the way down to the tendons. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the fourth, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Here it is the Amontillado. As for Lucchese, he is an ignoramus, interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his process arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. Fettered. Okay, remember, it's to restrain with chains or shackles. So there's this recess in the wall that's set 4 feet in. Okay, we know that, and it's in height 6 or 7 feet tall, and its width is about 3 feet. So essentially, when we're looking at a wall that's coming like this, we have something like this. Okay, we have this little spot that comes in, and then we're going to go in 4 feet. We're going to have from side to side, here's our width, which is 3 feet. And then from up and down, it's 6 to 7 feet tall. But now we have something odd going here. He's not steady on his feet. Remember, he's been drinking. And now Montresor has just what? He's tied him up with chains and shackles in this little spot here. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the niter. Indeed, it is very damp. What's more, let me implore you to return. No, then I must positively leave you, but I must first render you all the little attentions in my power. I'm going to have a little drawing at the bottom here. We all know that my drawing is not necessarily the best. Okay, so we have him within this recess, right? Okay, so we have him standing in here. I'm going to use a stick figure because why not? Okay, and then there is 2 staples, 2 shackles. And then around his waist, we have the chains, as well as chains going around his wrists. So he is tied by the waist with a chain links, as well as at his wrists. Remember, he's also heavily under the influence of alcohol at this time, and he has a terrible cough as well. The Amontillado! Ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. So this man has not realized exactly what's been going on yet. He hasn't realized that he has been duped. He has been tricked, and things are going to go very poorly for him. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I had before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. So he goes there and he starts putting bricks in to wall it up. But remember, we have somebody behind it, don't we? I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had, in great measure, worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. So Fortunato is finally coming to realize that things are going very wrong. And he's sobered up very quickly at the realization. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. So instead, he starts yelling back at him. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 9th, the 8th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha ha! A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, Amontillado, but is it not getting late? Will they be waiting at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said. "Let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor." "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. The air came forth and returned only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its place. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. May he rest in peace. In half a century, no mortal has disturbed them. A century is 100 years. So half of a century is 50. So we have this walled up area. And to make it look like it's been there just like that for a long time, he piles the bones in front of it. The story behind the Cask of Amontillado, Edward Rowe Snow. Well, at Fort Independence, Poe, who was a private there in 1827, became fascinated with the inscriptions on a gravestone on a small monument outside the walls of the fort. Beneath the stone are deposited the remains of Lieutenant Robert F. Massey of the U.S. Regiment of Light Artillery. During the summer of 1817, Poe learned 20-year-old Lieutenant Robert F. Massey of Virginia had arrived at Fort Independence as a newly appointed officer. Most of the men at the post came to enjoy Massey's friendship, but one officer, Captain Green, took a violent dislike to him. Green was known at the fort as a bully and a dangerous swordsman. When Christmas vacations were allotted, few of the officers were allowed to leave the fort, and Christmas Eve found them up in the old barracks hall playing cards. Just before midnight, at the height of the card game, Captain Green sprang to his feet, reached across the table, and slapped Lieutenant Massey squarely in the face. "You're a cheat," he roared, "and I demand immediate satisfaction." The duel began. Captain Green, an expert swordsman, soon had Massey at a disadvantage and ran him through. Fatally wounded, the young Virginian was carried back to the fort where he died that afternoon. His many friends mourned the passing of a gallant officer. Feeling against Captain Green ran high for many weeks, and then suddenly he completely vanished. Years went by without a sign of him, and Green was written off the Army records as a deserter. According to the story which Poe finally gathered together, Captain Green had been so detested by his fellow officers at the fort that they decided to take a terrible revenge on him for Massey's death. Visiting Captain Green one moonless night, they pretended to be friendly and plied him with wine until he was helplessly intoxicated. Then, carrying the captain down to one of the ancient dungeons, the officers forced his body through a tiny opening which led into the subterranean casement. By this time, Green had awakened from his drunken stupor and demanded to know what was taking place. Without answering, his captors began to shackle him to the floor using the heavy iron handcuffs and foot cuffs fastened into the stone. Then they all left the dungeon and proceeded to seal the captain up alive inside the windowless casement using bricks and mortar. Captain Green shrieked in terror and begged for mercy, but his cries fell on deaf ears. The last brick was finally inserted, mortar applied, and the room sealed up. The officers believed forever. Captain Green undoubtedly died a horrible death within a few days. In 1905, workmen repairing the fort found the dungeon. To their amazement, they found a skeleton inside, shackled to the floor with a few fragments of an old army uniform clinging to the bones. The assignment, page 216. Connect to the literature. Number 1, comprehension check. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 8. those are your questions to do for this. The next video we'll be talking about Edgar Allan Poe's style.